you can be involved with every decision in the company when you have 6 employees. Like that's possible. That's not necessarily even unhealthy. That might be absolutely appropriate in a lot of companies. But if you've got 30 people, you simply can't do that. So it's not possible. I don't mean you can't do that, meaning like it's the wrong decision. I mean, it's an impossible task. And it's people get burnt out very quickly.
Eric, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Talk Business podcast.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So we recently met. I've heard about you, and ultimately, I have created a post about that I'm going to be recording the next season of the show. And when I see a name more than once, then I say, you know what, let me check out this person, so to speak. And we had a call, and I think what you shared very well resonated with me. So I thank you for being here, and hope for a good conversation for our listeners.
Amazing. Looking
Sure.
forward. Where do we start?
So one of the things that you mentioned when we spoke before is a little bit about your past, that you had your own business prior to doing what you're doing now. So for our listeners that don't know about you, give us a little bit the short version of the story, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the 2-minute elevator pitch. So right now I work as a business coach full time. I work with founders and entrepreneurs, and I help mainly companies that are, $1 to $10 million in revenue, 10 to 100 employees. And usually I'm working with the founder, and it's oftentimes somebody who's trying to move from being a founder to move to being a true CEO, and somebody who's actually managing a business that's working for them in the way that they want it to, as opposed to, just working in a business and making money. Although the money part's important too. The way that I got here was I actually did that myself. So one of the few business coaches that's actually founded, run, and exited a pretty successful company. I founded a recruiting firm when I was 25, 26 years old, and I started that from scratch with a partner. We grew that to $7.5 million in annual revenue, 40 employees at the height, and I did that for 11 and a half years. And we really grew it to, we were mostly working in the digital media and online ad technology industry, and we built a real machine. And that was a really scaled company that was a sellable asset and had recurring annual revenues to a large degree and was really working. And that's kind of how I got here. And being able to do that, it gives you the insight into how companies function and what the dysfunction is when you're recruiting for them. Good recruiters get to know a lot about their clients. So it gave me a window into how companies work. And on the internal side, I was able to figure out, frankly, through a lot of trial and error and making a lot of mistakes, what works, what didn't work, how to manage and grow a team, how to keep people motivated, all of those kind of things that make any great company. I had to figure out on my own. And, coaching, I wouldn't have told you at the time that what's making this company really run well is coaching. But really, a lot of the success that we did have was because we were able to create leaders within the company who were able to manage others, who were able to manage clients, who were able to be seen as thought leaders in our industry. And that was really, through the way that we made a lot of that impact was through coaching. So that's kind of how, once I exited that, have run a couple other businesses, some more successful than others. Any good entrepreneur has some failures on their resume too. So that's how I got here. And actually being in the mud, running a business is something that I think gives you a valuable perspective that you're able to then impart to somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we speak about, the coaching and some of the questions I prepared myself to have in this conversation related to leaders and everything you do, I do want to touch on the part of that you said you grew a company, and at one point you sold a company. Tell us about at what point in this 11 and a half years you decided, you know what, I want to sell this. Was it just somebody approached you and you decided, you know what, if somebody wants to buy it, just take it, so to speak?
Sure.
And also, was there any planning, and if from a business perspective, of planning as far as making sure that you're selling a sellable asset, the words that you used before?
Sure. So I will tell you that I am not an M&A expert. We did build it with a mind to sell it. I ended up selling to my business partner. So it's a little bit different than going out into the open market. And, he already knew what he was buying. It was a clear, there wasn't the same type of due diligence, and it's a little bit more of a quote unquote easy sale. He knows what he was buying. I knew what I was selling. We had to agree on a price. But really what the core of it is building any business for sale. The way the company becomes a valuable asset is if the owner can be removed and the company can still continue to function. So otherwise, it's really just you. There are many successful recruiting firms out there that are one guy and a bunch of assistants that do his bidding, and they may make $1 million a year. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great business, but it's not really sellable because like nobody, if you, once you remove the owner, the business is toast.
Yeah.
So it needs to be scalable. And really that was the successful part of what we built together because once the proof's in the pudding. I've been gone since what, I don't know, before April of 2019. Company still exists. So company still
Got it.
runs. A lot of things have changed, I'm sure, but company still exists.
Got it. So obviously, currently you're focusing in helping founders transition into CEOs. Okay. So, from a marketing perspective, I know whenever we do a new brand or a brand and we ask people for titles for the business cards, so most founders put the CEO as one of on the title of the business card. Obviously, they need to transition into a CEO, as you mentioned. So, what are the fundamentals of what a founder does, and then ultimately, if you want to become a CEO, what does that transition look like?
Sure. So it's very similar. My answer is very similar to the last question, really, because you need to get when you're a founder, you're doing everything. So that means if you need stamps, you're ordering them. If you need a desk put together, me really, there should be somebody else doing it, but I'll take care of it after work. Like you're taking care of everything, and you're the default and the go-to to solve every single problem that the company faces. When you're one or two people, that's appropriate, and that's what you should be doing. And any great founder Jeff Bezos started off doing a lot of grunt work for Amazon, even though he started at a relatively high level and had investors early on, all that kind of stuff. He was still really doing a lot of the work. Lots of founders get stuck in that area because they become very good at doing the work. And they're the best person to do the work. And they know it, and everybody around them also knows it. And everybody comes to rely on them. And once they start hiring out employees, they hire friends and family usually as the first step, and it spreads out from there. The more they become successful, the more people they need. But if they don't proactively think about how am I going to get myself out of being the absolute nexus of this entire company and move myself intentionally into a peripheral like position where I'm really directing traffic, I'm delegating appropriately, I have a system for myself to keep track of what's going on, to check in and make sure that things are going in the right direction on both a macro level. They can be involved in small decisions as a microcosm of what's going well and what's not, to make sure that they have their finger on the pulse. But if they're proactively managing everything in the company, then they're not a CEO. You can write it on the business card. And maybe you should still write it on the business card for external purposes. But you're not really a CEO. You're a founder that has a lot of extensions of yourself. And the truth is that really can't go on indefinitely and have the founder be happy. Because usually people, 9.5 times out of 10, people burn out of that
Yeah.
because it's exhausting.
Yes. Obviously dealing with so many business owners in day-to-day experiences, what would you say, sometimes you have to go to the reason why founders are often reluctant to let go and switch over to that CEO position. What is the reasoning behind it, would you say?
I think what got them to this point of success is one thing, and they're just continuing to do that. But it requires a shift in mindset to say what got me here is not going to get me to the next tranche of growth. That's almost always true. If you think about it in terms of employees, there's a certain mindset that gets you from 0 employees to 10 employees. You can be involved with every decision in the company when you have 6 employees. Like that's possible. That's not necessarily even unhealthy. That might be absolutely appropriate in a lot of companies. But if you've got 30 people, you simply can't do that. So it's not possible. I don't mean you can't do that, meaning like it's the wrong decision. I mean, it's an impossible task, and people get burnt out very quickly. So it has to be a recognition of what got me to this point is not what's going to get me to the next point of success that I'm trying to get to. And usually founders don't, if they haven't done it before, they don't have experience in knowing even like what the question looks like. Well, how can I possibly delegate this? This is super important, and it usually is. And this other person that I could delegate it to doesn't have the capability to do it as well as I can, so I'm just going to do it. And they make that same decision like 50 times a day, and then it's 8 o'clock. They go home. They're burnt out, and they can't imagine doing that again. But they do it every single day for a long period of time. So to answer succinctly, it takes a really intentional shift in mindset of I'm not going to be the nexus of this company anymore. I need to rework my role within the firm, and it would be a success if I was not involved in every single thing that's going on here.
What is the perfect timing for that transition? And the reason I'm asking, because you see sometimes business owners that maybe have gone to that stage too quickly and they lost control of what's happening.
For
Or
sure.
sometimes it's too late and they can't even enforce it anymore because every client wants to speak to them and so on and so forth. So, yeah, at which point do you think, like, if somebody needs help, now's the time, so to speak, or now's the perfect time for that transition?
So I think each person has to know themselves because it's not a one size fits all answer. As a general rule, my opinion this is only my opinion. Somebody could disagree with this and
I'm
still be
only
right.
asking your opinion.
My opinion is around 10 employees.
Okay.
Around 10 employees, you can't reasonably expect to handle it past that point. You can't
Okay.
do everything yourself.
And what are the steps? So obviously, what are the steps that obviously every company is different, but what would you say is the basic step, building blocks for such a transition?
The main building blocks are, I would say there's probably three things. There's delegating, there's time management, and there's goal setting. And all of those things, those are simple things to say and difficult things to do. Let me go through, I guess, some mahalo on those. And my goal is to give, a taste of something that somebody who's watching this can come away with 2, 3, 4 practical things that they can actually implement and try out today that would actually help them further their business. So,
Great. Let's go for it.
okay. So in delegating, there's a great book called Buy Back Your Time. It's by Dan, I forget his last name, but you can find it on Amazon. It's not a cult classic. It's like a best-selling book, but that's a wonderful book on delegating that's really practical for everybody. The main point that he makes is that if you try to get somebody who is going to do something exactly as good as you're going to be sorely disappointed. That's not even the goal. The stated goal is to find somebody who's able to do something 80% as good as you and be able to level up and buy back your time. If they can meet that objective, that's good enough to delegate it to them. And most people are either under delegators or over delegators as a default. Like we all, have our own defaults and are trying to get to that golden middle path and figuring out, number one, handing off the task appropriately so that the person you're delegating it to understands what they're supposed to do, has the resources to actually do it. And then the most important part that a lot of founders forget, because they tend to just say, okay, I delegated it to Susie and now it's her job and now I'm out. Like, let me know if there's any problems. Setting up systems for yourself so that you are going to check in on the progress and make sure that it stays on the rails, so to speak. I think
Inspect what you expect.
That's a great saying. Yes, inspect what you expect, and what I'm going to steal that one. And I mean, what you measure is going to be what you get more of. So you have
Yeah.
to have a way to measure what the results are going to be from the project that you're delegating.
Absolutely. And I think I've had this exercise with leaders, in our office when we do a leaders forum or different programs, when I ask about name a delegation process that failed, and everybody has their hands up that they had this miserable situation where they delegated the most important task on the list the first time delegating to a new employee.
Right.
And I think there's a trust factor. There's an art of understanding what to delegate first. And you're not delegating the most important things, even if it's the most time consuming. You're
Right.
delegating the stuff that you could afford that should go wrong the first time, or something along those lines.
Right. And I think that's another thing that founders tend to think that every single point of the operation is crucial. And if this fails, that's it. It's curtain for us. And usually there are many, many components of things that are not essential. And they're also not as complicated as the founder likes to think that they are. A smart person that's been part of your team for a while can figure out a whole lot.
Yeah, and I follow a lot the Michael Hyatt's 5 step of delegation. And for our listeners, if you struggle of figuring out what to delegate, I actually have a free guide, ptexgroup.com/delegate, where you could download. And it's basically you keep tab for a few days in your activities, and then you go back to figure out which are the things that there's probably somebody in my office that could do it better than me, so to speak.
Right.
Because sometimes we get so in the rhythm of doing your daily tasks, you forget to look back to say, wait a minute, am I the best person to do that task or not? And you just go in the rhythm day after day after day, and all of a sudden he says, if and all of a sudden you run out of time. It's either you run your day or the day runs you.
Yeah. That's really that's a great
Yeah,
segue. That's
let's
the next
lead
point.
into
Time
time
management.
management. Sure.
So everybody I know, successful, not successful, I would say full stop. Any adult that I know struggles with time management now because we have so many things flying at us, whether it's digital communications, whether it's obligations that we have at home, personal life. Everybody needs way more of our attention than is possible to give everybody. So there are so many of us, and I think this is for anybody, whether they're a founder or an entrepreneur or really anybody else. It's important to be cognizant of how you're spending your time. If you want to spend half an hour, quote unquote, wasted reading a book, it's not business related, just to relax, or sitting by the pool, or doing whatever you want to do to relax and waste time. Great. Just do it with intention. If you want to take off a day, you should be able to take off a day and, do whatever you want to do. But if you're constantly getting pulled into things and then your day is gone, so that's your cue that you have a challenge to deal with. And the first step is actually being really intentional. It doesn't take a lot of time to do this part of just reviewing each day. At the end of the day, take 5 minutes and look at your calendar, depending on what type of job you're in, how structured it is. But look at your day hour by hour and evaluate where you got taken off of being intentional with your time. After you do that for a week, you have a lot more data to play with.
So let me ask you a question, because this is something that I hear a lot from leaders, and in particular people that are transitioning out. I need to be available for my team, and therefore I need to have my open door policy that I could get distracted at any given time. How do you coach business leaders to deal with that?
I mean, that's an awesome policy, and it works great when you've got 4 people in the office. So like, that's perfect. But once you grow out of having, I would say once you get past 10 people, you need to be available for your team, but you can't be available for your team at any given time. But you need to always have availability, but not right now. It's crazy to say anybody can come and interrupt me, whatever I'm doing, and they're the priority. When you have so many people that can interrupt you, I would say you have to be realistic. You're going to get taken off of being intentional with your time that way.
I'll even add to this that, like, I know that, and I do it myself. I'll always, employee will come over in the hallway and say, could I have 5 minutes? And then I'll say, sure, 4 o'clock. I'll be available 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock comes, and they don't need you
They don't
anymore.
need you anymore.
And the reason for that is because a lot of people, when they have a decision to be made, we're much rather somebody else will make the decision for them.
Mhm.
But you're not giving the autonomy to lead by example and ultimately make those decisions. Yes, they might fail once or twice, but ultimately that's how they'll learn. And if you have that open door policy, what ends up happening is they never take autonomy. You're training them to never make their own decisions. And ultimately, you sometimes become even the bottleneck, because they now know, I can't take this to the
I
finish
can't
line
move
because
forward until I talk to so-and-so. He's the decision maker, and he's really so much better at this than I am. I don't want to make a mistake. That's how it builds on itself, and you get to be in a position where you're a founder and you're in charge of everything that's in the nexus of the company. All of the spokes that go around the wheel, they all lead back to you, and that's not scalable by definition.
So let's dive in a little deeper on time management, because so the first thing is understanding where your time is going. I think knowing where your time is going, as you mentioned before, is an important point. But what is a good process for a leader to how to divide their days?
So I think number one is people have to work in blocks of time. We all do better in blocks of time. If you have, and usually you can group similar tasks together, and that can make up a lot, call it 60 to 80% of what you have to do. They're tasks that are similar to one another. So if you plan, I like to plan just week by week. I think planning further out, unless you're like an Uber planner and like everything is exactly like this, which again is not what most founders and most,
Uh-huh.
most leaders, their days, they don't think that way. Just plan week by week. So you can have a default and then change the default. So it's important let's say you want to spend, 4 hours a week in half an hour meetings with 8 different people on your team. Let's just, to make up an example. So you can decide how you're best going to do that. Do you want to group them all together, get them all out of the way on Tuesday afternoon? Some people work great like that, because then they're grouping like with like, and they know that Tuesday afternoon is my time for this. Some people would hate that, and you have to know yourself and say, like, okay, that is soul crushing for me. I really don't like these meetings. I have to do them, but we've established I can't get out of them. I have to do them. But I need to do one Tuesday, one Wednesday, one Thursday, one Friday, and one in the afternoon and one in the morning on each of those days. Otherwise, I'm going to be sick. So you need to know yourself and how you want to best work. And I think it's also important to realize, like, when your magic hours are that you're most productive. For me, I personally, better as the day goes on. So like if you tell me like we have to do a podcast together, I'm only available 8 a.m. I would tell you like, I'm sorry. You're not going to get the best of me. I just can't do it. Let me know when you got, I'll do 8 p.m., but we
The
can do 8 a.m. And you have to know when your magic
zone.
is going to
I
happen.
call it green zones. Every person has their green zones. I myself, I'm actually just the opposite. I could go on for a long time, but my mornings are where I'm full capacity.
There you go. And again, neither's right or wrong, but it's
Right.
important for each person to realize what they're doing, what needs your full like 100% of you. And a lot of the things that you're doing don't need 100%. If you have emails, it's important for you to follow up with clients and make sure you're staying in touch. And they really do need your personal touch. That's fine, but they probably don't need to be done in your prime working hours, where like you're in your green zone, as you said.
Mhm.
So I think that's a second component, knowing your magic time.
Yeah, I'll just add for our listeners, and especially this is the beginning of the year, and people are trying to, to manage time better. One of the things I've seen, I don't know why, but most leaders use their calendar only for external timing. So blocking out times for with third party or even internal people, but not only for themselves. What ends up happening, a lot of the projects a leader has is stuff they need to do themselves. They have to look at reports, review reports, come up with a strategy, whatever it is, finding those green zones or even just blocking out time for the stuff that you need to do for yourself as a leader,
Yeah,
going through the reports. And I think because we don't block out enough time for ourselves, the projects we have to do as a leader, and those projects get just added on between meetings, and you don't have the full
right.
capacity.
Right. And I think that again, most people, their calendar fills up like as the week goes, and like it just gets into a rhythm. So if you have those reports that you need to look through, you're not going to get to it if you didn't block it out the week before, because now your week's filled up and you got a lot of important stuff to do. But if you block it out for Tuesday at 4, from 4 to 5, you can always change it. If something emergent comes up, you're in control of it. You have to be willing to be flexible, and your calendar shouldn't be ruling you. But you can say, okay, if I need an hour to do this. I was going to do it Tuesday at 4. It doesn't need to be done until Thursday. I have an hour at this other time, Wednesday or Thursday morning. That's totally fine. But you have to be honest with yourself and do it with intention. And I think, like you're saying, if you don't block it off on your own calendar on your own, then it's like the shoemaker's son has no shoes, and you're never going to get
Uh-huh.
to work because you're busy doing everybody else's work.
Yes. So let's speak about the third one, which is you mentioned goal setting.
Yeah. So to me, I like to keep things as like simple as possible, and there are all sorts of amazing complex systems for setting goals based on all sorts of metrics. To me, the SMART goal system is the best one because it's easy. It's not my system. You can Google SMART goal system. I'm not sure who came up with it, but it's just a good framework that you can apply towards setting any goals. And the general idea is that for any goal to be one that is actually possible and probable that you're going to be able to meet it, it has to be specific, it has to be measurable, it has to be actionable, it has to be realistic, and it has to be timed
Time.
out. And if it doesn't meet one of those criteria, you have to reevaluate how you're setting the goal, because it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you have a wish, you don't have a goal.
Correct. And I see a lot of times when people write their goals is they focus on the outcome. The outcome is the dream, so to speak, but you don't control the outcome. You only control the input you do.
That's it. And a lot of, you'll talk to leaders, and they'll say, what are your goals for 2024? I don't think any leader has not thought about that question. We're sitting here January 2nd, 2024. So, what are your goals? Oh, I want to double sales this year. Okay, that's great. So that meets a couple of the criteria. It is specific and it is time bound. I guess it's measurable. Is it reasonable? No idea.
But it's
You
also
know,
again, it's the outcome of something else that you need to do in order to get to that level of
and
doubling your
it
sales.
doesn't it doesn't give you any framework
Correct.
whatsoever to get there.
Correct.
So, and once you see that if you can't justify to yourself that it's reasonable, the way to go to take that a step further, I'm giving a bare bones approach of
Sure.
a smart goal system is, but let's say you put out there you want to double revenue, you want to go from 1 million to 2 million. So how do you justify that that's reasonable? You have to be able to come up with a plan that you can say, okay, we have 16 salespeople, each of them do this much revenue, and we're going to add 12% to each of them, and they're going to need the following resources. You have to be able to look yourself in the eye in the mirror and say, here's how we're going to double revenue. because it's like you said, it's just saying words that you would like to happen that's focused on the outcome. It's not focused on what is actually in your control.
Got it. Let me ask you another question. When it comes to leadership in general, company culture is also very important because ultimately it's all about the people that, you want something done yourself, you could do it. But if you want something done on a larger scale, you need people to work alongside. What are some advice you give leaders as far as making sure they have a healthy environment?
So I think first of all, it really is very dependent on knowing your team. So every leader knows their team better than I'm going to know them as an outside coach. They certainly should. And if they don't, that's the first problem. You really need to understand what's motivating the employees that you have.
Gotta know
So,
your people.
I mean, for example, like, in my company, we had a lot of the very successful people were from male entrepreneurs, Orthodox Jews, guys who were 22 to 26, 7 when they joined the company. They had zero, one or two kids. They were usually married. They came motivated. They were there to work. I didn't need to teach them how to be motivated. They wanted to have a super fun office environment and they really valued that. And they also needed to be able to make a lot of money without a lot of people telling them exactly how to do what their job was, which was really, it was recruiting. So it was really sales. We hired some people that were from the general workforce and they came and they saw the office environment. Everybody seemed like they were fun. Everybody was having a good time. We had beer in the fridge. There were prize wheels. There were all kinds of fun stuff going on. And they said, wow, seems like a great, fun bunch of people. The mistake that we made was that we hired people that what they really wanted to get out of work didn't align because they were assuming, okay, and when work's over, all these people probably go out to drinks afterwards and they go out to eat and they hang out after work. And that was not, it seemed like that it was logical what they thought because everybody was having a great time in the office. But what my employees wanted and my team really wanted in general was not really something that they could find there.
It
So that
was a
was like a
misalignment.
mistake. It was a misalignment. So number one is you have to know your people. Number two is you have to be willing to take a slice of your quote unquote your time, work time to invest in fun activities for your team. I think that a lot of people feel like business is business. You want to have fun, go do that on your own time. And that's great for certain environments, but it creates a very rigid structure. Like just relax. Like just
Yeah.
relax a little bit. You're spending a lot of hours at work to be just sitting there focused only on work without any break in between. To me, we had beer in the fridge. So forget about the legal aspects. I don't know. We didn't have anybody under 21 anyway. I was the one who stocked the fridge. We did not actually drink a lot of beer. There was I would buy a 24 pack of beer like once every 2 months. It was not going. But everybody loved that at any time of the day, go ahead, free beer. And for our culture, that was what worked really well. That gave people it just gave people an easygoing feeling about their day. And it almost never got drank, but that wasn't the purpose of it. So we invested in that kind of a culture. You have to take, I'll give you another example. Which I find that a lot of companies don't do. We did activities once a month. Like it was my job as the visionary for the office to come up with something fun to do each month. So I solicited suggestions and advice from everybody on the team. And that's mostly what we ended up doing. But if nobody was driving that, it wouldn't end up happening. So, and the things that we did, frankly, we spent a bunch of money on some things, but some of the best things that people remembered, didn't cost anything. It required time and forethought of the leader into investing what kind of activities are going to actually be fun. We had one of the best ones we did. We had a puppy rescue that as their fundraiser, they bring puppies to your office. They set up a whole thing so that nobody can make a mess anywhere. And you have high-powered sales guys making a lot of money on the floor playing with puppies for 45 minutes. And everybody took pictures. They put on their social media. That's what somebody's going to go home and tell their spouse, tell their friends about, tell their kids about. They're not going to tell them how they made a lot of cold calls and closed the deal. That's not, they're going to remember the puppies. So
Yeah, you remind me, I remember once on Thanksgiving, we brought live turkeys. They were running around the office. Everybody was on their desks. Instead of on
that's
the
it.
floor, they were on the desks.
And nobody's going to forget that. That's what they're going to remember. So they're not going to remember the details of the work and how they were successful. They're going to remember those side things. And every company has a different culture. So as a leader, it's your responsibility to know what your employees really want to see. what is going to make them have fun at work. Somebody who has fun at work is going to stay with you for a lot longer than somebody who is super qualified that is having a miserable time with it, even if they're making a lot of money.
Got it. Let me try to get in another question, which is maybe a topic on its own, which is you coach business owners. Obviously, we discussed it, founders into CEOs. Are there founders that are not coachable?
Absolutely.
So what did you hear a lot, people have worked with a
I
coach
was
that
one.
didn't work out. Okay.
At
So
one point, I was one.
if somebody wants to self-evaluate themselves, what do you want to see in a person that you could say this person is a coachable leader?
They have to be interested in growth and interested in hearing that there may be a perspective that they haven't thought of. And I think that, part of it's like almost counterintuitive for most founders. What makes them great is their confidence and their competence in themselves and their abilities. And if they're not misplaced in that, they can be really successful that way. But that gets you to a certain point until you have a hiccup in the road. And then you realize that whatever your strengths are, you're not equipped to deal with this issue. Like you've never seen it before. You don't have the experience and you don't have the knowledge to do it. So most people, most founders for sure, they don't say, okay, I'm starting a company. It's been a year. Everything's going amazing. And now I need a coach. That's not usually when somebody hires a coach. Most people look to hire a coach when they have been doing really well. There are still a lot of things going right, but they've hit a bump and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with this next situation, this next tranche of growth. That's a person who's coachable. The person who's not coachable can sometimes find their way through the forest also. I'm not here to say that like everybody needs a coach, and if not, you're making a massive mistake and you should call me right now. Like that's not how it
Sure.
works. But it's going to take a lot longer for you to figure out your way through the forest if you haven't been there before and if you have no idea where you're going. You still can find your way out on the other side just fine. But if you're not interested in hearing a different perspective than what you would come up with on your own, you're just much less likely to come out of it quickly. So yes, there are lots of people that are not coachable. And by the way, I don't try to create demand that way. I think as a coach, it's important to recognize that somebody has to come in already saying, all right, I would like to hear what you have to say. If you can help me, great. If not, then not. But I can't, as a coach, tell somebody why they should need a coach and convince them. It's not that kind of sales process.
You remind me, I once spoke to a marriage counselor and asked him, is there any time a couple came to you and you said it's a lost case, there's no chance? And he says, never. He says, whoa, never has a couple come to you and you said it's a lost chance. He says, you didn't tell me a couple was sent to me. You said a couple came to me. Then
Right.
there's still hope. There's still hope. So
That's right.
back to your point, like if the demand, when somebody understands there is a challenge, I'm seeking out help versus trying to convince somebody that they need help.
Yeah. And I
Very-
think it's important whenever you're evaluating any coach, you have to make sure that you really click with the person personally and that you feel that they understand you, because it shouldn't be pulling teeth to have an initial conversation with them, or else you're talking to the wrong person.
100%. I personally am not a business coach or consultant. I do clarity sessions, like one-off sessions for business owners that just want to have a 1 hour, 2 hour brainstorming session as far as where they want to go with the business. But whenever I need to refer a coach, I'll always say, I'll give you 3 names. You need to speak to all 3 and then make a decision which one clicked with you.
Yeah.
Because they could
That's
be,
a good approach.
yeah, because you could have 3 people phenomenal, but one will click and the other won't. And you have everybody that had it's somebody that you have to click because it's a relationship. It's a very strong relationship. It's actually sometimes a relationship where you have to share a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And you want to be able to have that relationship, an open relationship. Which leads me to one final question, which is there's something actually near and dear to my heart as well, which is personal development. So you see a lot of business owners will focus on scalability and growth in their company, but they're not necessarily connecting it to their personal growth themselves. As a personal coach, not just a consultant, how do you bridge the two, so to speak? Is this a skill that the person needs to develop themselves versus a process they have to put in for the business?
That's a great question. So I think it really goes down to first of all, I think every client I've ever worked with has some semblance of struggle with that issue. I certainly have had that myself. You have to look at a person as a complete person. You're not just a founder, and then when you go home, you're a father and a husband. Like it doesn't work that way. You have to figure out, first of all, what do you break it down in terms of hours? Start there. What hours do you want to be working? Okay, that's the universe of work time that you have. But during that time, do you want to be only working? Are you carving off some time for yourself? Are you carving off time to develop? What skills do you want to develop? I have one client that wants to be a better public speaker, so is doing Toastmasters. That requires time, effort, energy. There's no shortcut, but that's an investment in personal development. And I think that to be a complete person and to be really successful, you have to be the same person to everybody, and it's just different sides of the same coin. So it's important to invest in the entire person's development. That can be developing skills, it can be developing traits, it can be developing a mindset. It's different for everybody. But I do think that if you only work on the business, I'm a business coach, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, so I don't pretend to be one. But at the same time, I think you have to be looking forward towards what you want to be as a person, as a leader. And that's going to help you in your personal life. That's going to help you in your business life. And it's all one complete unit. So I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah, sure. And that it just reminds me a quote that I've probably used on the show multiple times, which Dave Ramsey has a famous quote that a business will never outgrow its leader. Like if you don't have that growth mindset on your personal development, your business will catch up on it because you don't have that growth mindset for your company.
And I think a key component of that, maybe it's a good point to end with, is that the one trait that I've found that all leaders that are amazing really share is that they're curious. They're curious about what's going to happen. They're curious about how something's going to work. They're curious about where something can lead. But like that's a trait that virtually every leader that's successful that I can think of, they're curious people. They're not just good at doing a task. They want to see how it's going to work, and they want to see around the bend of what's going to happen. So that's a leaning into that curiosity and seeing where that takes you, I think is a really good way for a leader to develop themselves.
Beautiful. Where can people find more information about you and the services you offer?
Yeah, thank you. So my number is 678-392-1432. I'm very easy to find. I do answer my phone. I answer my texts.
You're the second person on the show to give their cell phone in all these years.
There we go. Okay. So LinkedIn is great too. Eric Adelman, Adelman. That's probably the easiest and simplest way. I'm always happy to schedule time with any founder or entrepreneur that seems like they are the type that would like to work with me. We can always set up a call, and LinkedIn is probably the best way, or call me or text me on that number.
Great. For the links, resources mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes at www.ptexgroup.com/podcast. We will link to the LinkedIn profile, Eric's LinkedIn profile. Let's close with the 4 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
All right, go.
Number 1, a book that changed your life.
Book that changed my life. Never Split the Difference.
Number 2, a piece of advice you got that you never forget.
Piece of advice that I got that I never will forget. Just try getting to the minimally viable product. You'll fix the details later.
Great. Number 3, anything you wish you could go back and do differently.
Anything I wish I could go back and do differently. I just try to look forward.
Beautiful. And last and final question, what's still on your bucket list to achieve?
What is still on my bucket list to achieve? That is a great question. It's 2024. I'm making a bar mitzvah this year. So
okay.
We have twin boys that are going to be 13 in March.
And, beautiful. That's a beautiful thing to look forward for.
That's a bucket list that we've been working towards passively and actively. But getting them to a place where we wanted them to be when they were 13, that was something that has been on my bucket list for quite a long time before they were born, and we're almost there.
Great. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. I know your time is valuable. That is why, in the name of our listeners, we'll forever be grateful for sharing some of your time with us today. It's been a blast.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
My pleasure.